Back before the whole Keep It Public movement, before the Hunting Public YouTube show, back before public land deer hunting was even cool, like when it was just a thing you did when you had nowhere else to hunt. There was this guy named Dan Infalt.
It looks like I got me another one. I was coming back here to go hunting, and I saw some deer running around, so I started sneaking over there, and amongst the deer there was one pretty good-sized buck bedded.
Infalt is a fanatical deer hunter from southeastern Wisconsin, and he's made a name for himself by killing big bucks on public lands. He's taken dozens of stud whitetails from public cattail marshes and swamps that many other hunters simply overlook.
It's pretty noisy back here with the leaves and crap. I'm in swamps to get that suction noise too, so I took off my boots and socks, and one step at a time I went into the wind until I got within range, and I had to just get over a little bit to get a shot.
Eventually, he went on to write a book titled Extreme Whitetail Tactics, the Big Buck Serial Killer's Best Hunting Stories. Through the book and videos and his Hunting Beast website, Infalt has earned himself a bit of a cult following here in the Midwest.
Yeah, and I shot him right in his bed. It was a good poke, but I got him, I saw him run, and he went back down, and he's laying right up here, so he ain't moving. I'm pretty sure he's down.
I'm Editor-in-Chief Alex Robinson, and today on the podcast, OL contributor Josh Honeycutt sits down with the Big Buck serial killer. They'll talk about how Infalt has been so successful taking mature bucks on public ground, and more importantly, how you can be too.
Yeah, he's down.
Let's talk about, how you got into hunting. Who introduced you to the outdoors?
Really, that's a hard question because I can remember being passionate about hunting my whole life, as long back as I can remember. And my dad really didn't hunt by the time I came around. I had some brothers who hunted that I really looked up to, but I didn't really hunt with them. By the time I was old enough to hunt, they had gone off to Vietnam. And I kind of grew up hunting on my own, just going out, back and chasing critters around. And I think that was probably a good thing because I didn't learn any bad habits, and I kind of learned from the animals.
Yeah, absolutely. Understanding whitetail behavior is one of the key elements and components of your success throughout the years. So, to that point, what are some of the biggest lessons you've learned in the realm of whitetail behavior?
So for me, mature deer seem to be a whole different critter. It's like a whole different animal from like a 2-year-old or a 1.5-year-old buck. And they don't move around a lot in daylight. And really, in order to kill mature animals, I think you have to be really close to their bedding, whether it's on accident or on purpose. That's where you need to be. And I've made an art of getting really close to where they bed. And I know I've watched and or heard a lot of the big bucks I've killed get up out of their beds and come to me, and I'm still shooting them at almost closing time. So that kind of emphasizes how you have to be close.
Yeah, for sure. When it comes to, and I know it's going to be different based on the circumstances that you find yourself in, the visibility from the deer from its bed and this, that, and the other, but just on average, in the average scenario you find yourself in, when it comes to getting close to these bedded deer, how close are you in fact getting to their specific beds?
It differs with habitat. I love the swamps around my home, and in the swamps I can get really close. And I think I average probably 75 to 100 yards from the actual beds. When I get up into the hill country in western Wisconsin, where it's a little more mature forest, then I tend to be about 200 yards back.
Good deal. So they have quite a bit more visibility in that open terrain, that more mature habitat, obviously. How slow are you moving whenever you are trying to slide ultra close to these bedded deer?
Yeah, that alters based on some factors like wind, rain, things like that, how noisy it is. When you're on wet ground, the leaves don't crunch. You can get faster, go faster, quieter. In normal circumstances, I'm being pretty slow for about the last 100 yards, to the point where I literally have to stop 100 yards back and just let my system slow down before moving forward, or I tend to catch myself going too fast. But all it takes is one broken branch or something for that deer to catch you. So for me, it's like I want to be right at the boundary of how far that deer can see, smell, and hear. Right at the boundary of all the senses, as close as I can possibly get. And to do that, I mean, you have to be quiet and you have to be stealthy for sure. It can take me, in some scenarios, a half hour, 45 minutes to get that last 100 yards. So you really have to believe in what you're doing too. You have to believe there's a deer there, or you wouldn't be able to force yourself to go that slow.
Sure. When it comes to your equipment, are you typically trying to, obviously you've got to go in light to do this successfully. You got to go in light and quiet. So what is the typical gear that you're carrying with you while you're going in there? Do you like to have preset stands hung over these beds? Do you like to pack in, as you go and then do a hanging hunt? What are you typically looking at from a gear perspective when you're trying to get ultra close to these whitetails?
So for me, I'm hunting public land probably 80% of the time. And on the public land in my home state, I can't hang and then come back later. Not that I would, because I'm almost always hunting a fresh spot. But I have a system. As you know, I developed my own tree stand and sticks. I wear them on my back, and my safety harness, I wear one of those vests from Hunter Safety, and it's got like 6 pockets on it, and every pocket has an item in it. And it's a specific spot for the item, so I always have it. Like my bow rope goes in one pocket, my release goes into another. And I have very few things on me, literally. I think most people go into a hunt with more stuff than I take on a 3-day backpacking trip, or a camping trip. I take hardly anything with me. I don't want to be caught drinking water or eating a sandwich or something when I'm that close to an animal. So I'm going in really quiet and stealthy. I just have a bow, a release. Depending on the time of year, I might have a grunt call, but I have very little with me. Everything is, I've taken painstaking efforts to make quiet. I use stealth strips to quiet buckles and any place that might make a noise. I even, where the sticks thread to my stand, I wax the threads so that they don't squeak. I do a lot of things to make sure that I don't have any kind of weird or strange noise that might alert the deer.
Sure. When it comes to a high impact, high risk, high reward tactic like this, obviously your success rate I'm sure has improved over time. But, for the average deer hunter out there trying to do this, trying to accomplish this, use this tactic, generally what kind of success rate are you looking at if they do it effectively? And by effectively, I mean they make it to their preferred stand location without alerting the deer. They make it up into the tree. They hang their stand. They get everything set up and they're good. Barring any kind of blunder that causes them to blow that deer out in that process. What is the typical success rate on a situation like this?
That's an interesting question. I guess my personal success rate plummets and scores based on where I'm at, and how the deer population is, how the pressure is. But I've noticed with other hunters, most guys, when they first start out doing this, they struggle for like the first 2 years, maybe into the 3rd year. It seems real easy. They go out and scout and they're like, holy crap, these beds are right where he said they'd be. They're, I found the big buck's bed and blah, blah, blah. And they think they got it made. But what they don't realize is I've got one of those perfect scenarios just about every time I go out hunting where I know where that buck's bed is. I know he lives in here. I set up on it, and probably, 30% of the time a target buck doesn't come out of there. Probably more than that, Usually something comes out of those beds, but it ain't always the buck that I'm after. But doing it over and over and over again, eventually you score. Some scenarios have higher success than others. Some don't. But I tend to see more of a better age class than your average guy. And, where I hunt is pretty heavy pressure between a bunch of cities and towns and stuff. And, like rut, we have more people in the parking lots than gun season in most places. It's pretty crazy around here. Even opening weekend in September finds our parking lots flooded with people. So I can go a lot of sits without seeing a deer, but just about every year I pull a nice one out of here.
Yeah, for sure. Obviously, this is a process. You're trying to figure out where these deer are bedding at. Generally, when are you finding these beds? What are you looking for? Where do you find them? What are the key characteristics that go into these beds that mature bucks use?
Well, I do most of my scouting in the wintertime. So as soon as I'm done hunting, as soon as I tag out or I'm done hunting, the sooner after the season's over or after my season's over that I close out, the better. Because looking at the beds when they're fresh is a lot easier because deer tend to migrate in the winter months. But I go in and I look at the beds and I really pick them apart and do like detective work to try and figure out the timing of when the buck is there. Because I find it's like a 2-week peak period in most bedding areas. And if you don't hit that timing correct, you generally don't get the deer. So it could be based that he's bedding there on acorns, or it could be that he's bedding there because of a doe group that's bedding there, so he's there during the rut. And, it could be some food source. It could be the amount of cover that's there at that time of the year. And the more you do it, the better you get at that detective work. I'm looking at in swamps, anywhere basically is transition, edge. They tend to bed along edge. So like in swamps and marshes and stuff, I'm looking for islands. I'm looking for points. I'm looking for remote areas. I really concentrate a lot on stuff really close to the road that's in between parking lots, any place where people don't go. People leave scent, whether they like to believe it or not, that lasts, 10, 15 days, maybe even a lot longer than that a deer can detect that they were there. So any place where people go a lot, deer are going to be leery about moving in daylight. So they're going to find the spots where nobody goes. So a lot of times I'll take the public land and I'll look at the map and I'll kind of cross out everything that's obvious that people would go to. And I take the 10% that's left on the map and that's what I scout. But I'm still looking for those edges, those transitions in my area because of how populated it is. And I see the same thing in the Northwoods where there's wolves. They really use water as a buffer a lot. So they bed in thick areas that are wet. So little high spots surrounded by water, they love, especially mature bucks. So I kind of gravitate towards water, keeps people out. And that beside the road thing has been really good for me too. Nobody really goes in and to a parking lot and then walks along the road a quarter mile following the road. They either go out a little ways or they go out a long ways, but nobody hunts beside the road there. So that's been really good to me. I've taken a lot of my biggest bucks right along roadsides. That's
very cool. When it comes to these deer that you're hunting on these pressured areas, whether it's, private land or public land. I mean, I personally hunted some private land that was way more pressured than some public I've been on. So, obviously there's some takeaways here that purely private land hunters can get from this as well, especially if they're hunting properties that have shared permission. So how does that relate in those situations? Do a lot of these private land deer that are really heavily pressured, do they act similarly to the public land deer that you're after?
Absolutely. Deer are deer. It's just a matter of, intercepting them. One thing I see with the private land guys is a lot of times they'll put up stands in the best funnels, best spots, best positions over food plots and stuff, and they'll rotate through those stands. And it just seems like those bucks learn where those stands are. And you get on the mature bucks tracks, you'll watch them go through that whole woods without ever going past one of those stands. It takes that mobile move to get them. When I look at the, I've got private lands too where I got preset stands. But when I look at the majority of my mature bucks, the very oldest ones, say the top 15, I think out of the top 15, something like 11 or 12 of them were the very first time I sat a spot. And a couple of the other ones were the first time I sat it for the year. So that's not by coincidence. I mean, we do hunt the same spots over and over again on occasion. But the results speak for themselves. And that's one of the things that I've been good at is really breaking down how I've gotten my success and really concentrating on what's caused the success rather than just, monotonously keeping on hunting. I'm always trying to tweak and change,
Yeah, for sure. It's good to be able to figure out what works and what doesn't. You've already hit a lot of it, obviously. But if you just had to narrow it down to 2 or 3 things, what do you think would be the top reasons, top components of that success that you've experienced throughout the decades? What are those biggest, most important, most influential factors?
I would say first sits are really important. Catching that deer by complete and utter surprise. That's probably one of the most important things. The other thing is to look for that spot where nobody else goes, rather than looking for classic deer hunting sign, what you think a deer should live in. Look at where nobody goes. A lot of the deer I shoot are in places nobody would dream a deer lives. I mean, there's not trees to hunt out of. It's just basically bushes and water and stuff. And because of that, some big mature buck can live in there undetected. The other thing is to just keep moving. Don't hunt the same spot twice. They figure out where you were. You gotta keep, getting those fresh spots and keep moving until you find that animal.
We'll be right back after the break.
Hey, it's Kaylee Cuoco for Priceline. Ready to go to your happy place for a happy price? Well, why didn't you say so? Just download the Priceline app right now and save up to 60% on hotels. So whether it's Cousin Kevin's Kazoo Concert in Kansas City, go Kevin, or Becky's Bachelorette Bash in Bermuda, you never have to miss a trip ever again. So download the Priceline app today. Your savings are waiting.
Go to your happy place for a happy price. Go to your happy price, Priceline.
When it comes to pressuring deer, if you do happen to bump that deer you're after, that target animal, whether you know what the deer looks like or not, he's in the area, he's the one using that particular bed. If you happen to mess up and bump that deer, how often do you see it come back? Are you going to hunt that spot again? Everybody talks about the bump and dump tactic, and stuff like that. So, what happens in that particular scenario? What do you find yourself doing?
So if I bump a shooter buck, I will hunt that spot the next day. Most of the time I will not get another crack at it and add him in that spot. But let's say it's, 1 out of 6 or 1 out of 7 times he does come back. Well, those are pretty good odds. So I do throw another hunt at it. And another thing is I want to keep the deer honest, because if I don't hunt that spot again, I won't know if he came back. Right. So I'll hunt it again the next day. Or even if I jump him, I'll hunt him that day too. So I'll hunt it the day I jump him, because a lot of times they'll circle back in thinking you pass through. But what I do find is they circle in from the downwind side and they smell the whole area before they come back. So you have to tend to hunt it like the first transition downwind. And if you don't, you almost always get busted. I've been busted by it many times. But once I bump them out of there, I would rather, there's kind of different kind of bumps. Let's put it like that. There's a soft bump where the deer gets up and kind of looks around and says, I heard something. I don't know what, but maybe I should just move on. And then there's a hard bump where you just about step on that thing and you send them out snorting and blowing and running 100 miles an hour. Those hard bumps usually don't come back. It's the soft bumps that have a high tendency to come back. Once I hunt a spot and I'm convinced that that deer isn't there, either I hunted and I never saw it, or I hunted it and bumped the deer and gave it another hunt, then I'm going to hunt that area down and I'm going to go from bedding area to bedding area. And I tend to see better results as I start running out of good bedding areas, because there's only so many places that deer can go. And if he goes back to one of those other bedding areas, he smells my scent there. So it's kind of like stacking is what I call that.
Sure. Let's say you're hunting a specific deer. If it's a deer about, you've maybe followed this deer for at least part of this season, or you've got multiple years of history. When are you typically hunting that deer? Do you prefer the rut? Do you prefer the pre-rut? Do you prefer the late season? Is there a specific time that you like to hunt specific bucks?
Well, bucks do different things at different times of the year. So I'll hunt him in his rut areas during rut, and I'll hunt him in his late season area and late season, and I'll hunt him in his early season area and early season. But if it came down to it, I've had my greatest success with mature bucks in the first couple of weeks of the season, not during the rut, early season. Now I see more bucks during rut. I see more of the 2-3-year-olds that a lot of guys would be really happy shooting, and I've been happy to shoot. But the absolute mature bucks that I've shot, the majority of them have come from early season.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I've always felt, whether it was right or wrong, that the rut is the best time to kill a buck, but it's the worst time to kill a specific buck. And so it sounds like you think that to be true. You say that your best success comes during the early season. To that point, just surface level, people are going to be hunting all fall and winter. Generally, what are the key components, the key elements that you find a buck, let's say his requirements in an area for the early season, pre-rut, rut, and late season? What are some of the most important things that hunters should look for, that bucks are looking for each of those 4 phases?
I think one of the things that gets me on bucks the quickest, and it's not 100%, but in early season, is food. I mean, like this year, there's a good acorn crop. So they're in a lot of cases bedding near acorns. So that can kill you in the hills or in big forests where there's oaks everywhere. They can just bed under the oaks. But in the swamps and the marshes, oaks are isolated in like islands and stuff, and there's very limited areas as there could be. So I look for the bedding that's surrounding those oak islands or those oak points leading out into the swamp, and I do very well on that.
Good deal. When it comes to that, you say that's kind of your key component for the early season and probably leading into the pre-rut. What are you seeing these deer, and not just deer, these mature bucks, the top 10% that you're chasing, the top 10% of bucks that are on the landscape, come the rut? I mean, are you seeing these pressured deer drop their guard at all, like a lot of private land deer do, unpressured deer? Or are you seeing them still kind of stick to their guns as far as what they decide to do based on security?
They drop their guard, just, private deer and public deer, they all drop their guard. But I don't think they drop it as much as people think. I think a lot of what you're seeing running around chasing and stuff is younger deer. I mean, if mature deer that were 6, 7 years old ran around during the rut all day long chasing does through funnels, they wouldn't last a day. They'd never get to that old. So it's a rare mistake that they do in daylight, run around through those funnels. I think they might make that mistake once or twice a year. And if you're lucky enough to be there when that happens, great. But as far as movement, I don't think they move very well during the rut either. I mean, when I do see, like in the marshes and stuff, big bucks in rut, I usually see them in daylight bedded with or adjacent to does. I see them stay in thick cover. They don't go near trees. They don't run the trails and stuff, and they try to like keep the does from even going up into those areas where they don't want them to go. And they're really hard to kill, a mature buck during the rut. It can be done, and it does happen all the time. And for the average guy, that's probably the best time to be out there because anybody can get lucky. It can be the day that buck takes off running and runs in front of you or goes through that funnel. But for a guy who understands deer behavior and hunts the odds, I do better in, outside of that season. I do my best in rut hunting actually before the rut actually begins. I usually do my best during rut, like the 3rd week of October, 3rd or last, rather than during rut. They're still in a pattern instead of being more random, and they tend to lay down a lot of sign. So a guy can, scout with a stand on his back in late October, find a rub line that's fresh. Rubs are still tacky, coming out of bedding, going to does or whatever and follow it back and cut them off. I think a little more pre-rut than what most people are used to. Done well for me. But then you're not hunting funnels, actually. You're hunting more. You're still hunting, bedding movement, but they're making their sign glow a little more.
Sure. When you're doing that, we've talked about the early season, you're focusing on food. We've moved into the pre-rut, early phases of the rut, where you're kind of really working backwards, so to speak, and you need to figure out where those deer are at. How do you know when to stop when you're working backwards?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I don't always have the correct answer. Usually, from looking at a lot of beds, I can usually judge the terrain and I know about where they're going to be, but it's a hard thing to describe to somebody. It's right on the edge usually, and it's usually you can see a pocket that they're going to bed in. They're not going to be out in open cattails. They're not going to be in open tag alders just anywhere. They're going to be right on the edge in like the perfect spot to bust you if you come in there. So I'm kind of looking for that and holding back for it and not getting too far away and not getting too close. But really, every now and then I bust those deer out of their, bedding area by getting too close. And then I'm swearing that I'll never do it again, but then I got to go back out there and do it the same thing again the next day. And really, if you're not occasionally kicking a deer out, you're too far back. That really should be your judge. I mean, if you're occasionally bouncing one and swearing at yourself for doing it, then you're probably pushing the envelope about the right distance. And I don't think most people are doing that. I think most people are way too conservative. It's very rare that I see my target buck and don't have a shot at it because I'm pushing that envelope to right on top of him.
Sure.
If he comes out, I usually have my shot. I hear a lot of other people tell me, oh, the deer came out, went a different way, or it didn't quite get to me in daylight. And then I come in the next day and he's gone. Well, yeah, he smelled you were there. You have to make that count the very first time you're in there.
Sure. So we've talked about the early season and the pre-rut. We're moving into the rut now. You've talked about how these deer are really hard to kill and maybe not in those traditional rut stands like funnels and pinch points. Where are you finding and targeting these mature top-end whitetails during the rut?
Okay. So let's back up to the spring scouting. When I'm looking at the beds and stuff, if I find a buck bedding area that's just tore up with ropes, I'm figuring they're bedding there pre-rut, late October, early November. And I'll target those bedding areas that I had found in early, in winter that had all that sign in it and hunt those. I will hunt doe bedding areas that also harbor bucks towards rut or adjacent bedding areas that are near there. But I still kill the majority of my mature bucks around bedding, not in funnels.
Good deal. So we passed the rut now. You still got a buck tag, and you're not going to spend it on anything but a mega mature deer. Where are you finding these pressured deer come the late season?
Late season is going to be all about food. Actually, late season is probably the easiest time to find and hunt a mature buck. It is also a very hard time to kill one. They seem easy, but the trouble is they're usually in a large group of deer feeding in some sort of large food source. And it's usually like feast or famine. You're either in all the deer or you're not, because there's little pockets of good food. And it's all about feeding. And they move real well in daylight late season if you wait till it's cold. Now, that's probably not everywhere. I think if you got a little further south than where I'm at, you probably wouldn't have that. Because I've noticed for me, it's like right when it starts getting bitter cold, I start getting that really good late season movement. And it's been really good for me, but I generally don't have a tag at that time.
Sure. One quick, just short nugget of gold advice. What is the one thing you would tell a deer hunter that's already kind of experienced that can elevate him or her to the next level?
Passive aggressiveness. You got to know when to be aggressive and when to hold back. I seem on the outside to be very aggressive about the way I hunt, but I'm only aggressive on kill day. Otherwise, I'm sitting back with binoculars. I'm not going near the spot. I'm not going in there just making sure his tracks are in there or whatever. I'm staying out and staying back until it's time to kill.
Good deal. We've only got a few minutes left here. What does deer hunting in the outdoors mean to you?
It's my life. I mean, I'm a hunter first. It sounds weird, but that's my whole lifestyle. It's who I am. It's more than just a hobby or a sport. Even if I'm not hunting deer, I'm a hunter. It's who I am. It means everything.
The Outdoor Life podcast is edited and produced by Senior Deputy Editor Natalie Krebs. It's hosted by me, Editor-in-Chief Alex Robinson. Our music from this episode is by Francis Myung Pavin via APM Music. Next week on the podcast, we sit down with Dr. Grant Woods to talk about science, but in an interesting way. Dr. Woods will explain how you can use trail cameras like a researcher to start killing bigger bucks